You want answers?
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
You want answers?
You have offended my family.
I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth.
And you have offended the Shaolin Temple.
You can't handle the truth.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Radical Rant.
All right, welcome back, everyone. It's President's Day 2011, and I'm going to take the time in the rant here to give you a look at the history of U.S. presidents, hemp, marijuana, and prohibition. And some of you may know some of these things about the presidents, but it's always good to get a look from Washington to Obama on this particular history. And you're going to get a couple surprises, too, some stuff you think you know that isn't actually true. Let's go to it right away here. We start, of course, with our first president, the father of our country, George Washington. And many folks know some of these things about George Washington. Of course, the colonies back then were all deep into hemp farming. Hemp was used to pay taxes. It was a major crop for the American colonies. So it's no surprise that George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and many other of the founding fathers grew hemp. We have these quotes from Jefferson, quote, "Make the most of the Indian hemp seed and sow it everywhere," end quote. And, quote, "The artificial preparation of hemp from Silesia is really a curiosity," end quote. And, quote, from his diaries, "began to separate the male from the female hemp plants," end quote. All of these point to George Washington not just being a hemp farmer, but also being a hemp consumer, as in cannabis, as in marijuana. The artificial preparation of hemp from Silesia that is referred to in that quote refers to hashish, refers to the preparation of hashish. And that is a curiosity, indicates that he at least knew of it and knew that it was used for drug consumption purposes. Separating the male plants from the female plants could have two possibilities. One is to make a stronger fiber of hemp plant, or two, to get the females separated so that you can get their flowering tops for smoking. Now, it's most likely that he was doing the former, trying to get strong hemp plants, but it's not out of the question that he may have done both. As we move on to our second president, John Adams was not known to have consumed cannabis in any sort of recreational way, but of course was also well known of the hemp that was of benefit to this country. His quote is, "We shall by and by want a world of hemp more for our own consumption," end quote. As we move on, Thomas Jefferson, the third president, of course, was a well-known hemp farmer, and his quote was, "Hemp is of first necessity to the wealth and protection of the country," of course referring to the industrial hemp crop. But then there's this quote that will be a little bit controversial. Some folks may have seen it at the beginning of the movie Totally Baked, or found it by searching through the internet. And the quote is, "Some of my finest hours have been spent sitting on my back veranda, smoking hemp and observing as far as my eye can see," end quote. Based on all the research I can find, this quote is actually false, or at least can't be cited. They cannot find any citation for it. I've consulted Monticello.org, which is Jefferson's the Jefferson legacy, the Jefferson archive, and consulted the sources on hemp and smoking. And we looked through the papers of the Thomas Jefferson digital edition, Thomas Jefferson's retirement papers, the Ford edition, the Lipscomb-Berg edition via Google Books, and we could not find this statement anywhere in the writings of Thomas Jefferson. Now, if someone does have a citation for this and can provide proof of where this quote was found, I'll be glad to change my mind on that, but as far as I can tell at this moment, that is false. Now, as we move on to more early American presidents, James Madison is claimed that that hemp gave him insight on starting a new democratic nation. Still looking for citation information on this one, but that's known of James Madison's time. James Monroe became the ambassador to France, as well as being one of our presidents. And while he was ambassador to France, he openly smoked hashish. It was well known that Monroe smoked hashish. As we move on, Andrew Jackson, Zachary Taylor, and Franklin Pierce were all presidents who served during wartime. They were in the army at the time, or were leaders in the army, and all of them were known to have smoked cannabis with their troops. According to the archives that I found, cannabis smoking was twice as popular among American soldiers in the Mexican War at the end of the 1800s, or in the middle 1800s there, than it was in Vietnam. Franklin Pierce, the president, actually wrote in a letter back to his family, quote, "It was the only good thing about that war. That is the Mexican War. The only good thing about the Mexican War was the smoking of the cannabis, according to President Franklin Pierce. Now, we move on to Abraham Lincoln, and this is another president for whom there is a lot attributed with regard to prohibition. One of the quotes we get is, "Two of my favorite things are sitting on my front porch, smoking a pipe of sweet hemp, and playing my Hohner harmonica," end quote. Attributed to Lincoln having written that in 1855. This quote is demonstrably false. Hohner did not even make harmonicas until 1857, and they didn't export them into America until 1868, 4 years after Lincoln's assassination. Now, Lincoln was known to have played harmonica during the Lincoln-Douglas debates. There's a famous quote that goes back to him speaking of how Douglas would have a big brass band backing him up, and he would do just fine just with his harmonica. And there's a lot in Lincoln about prohibition and whether or not he was a part of the temperance movement. I found many references to early acts by Lincoln before he became president, when he was still in the state legislature in Illinois, passing or proposing bills that would have prohibited alcohol at the time. He was very much into prohibition at the time. And that brings me to the next quote that is often brought up with regard to President Lincoln that may shock some of you out there. The quote that comes out and says, "Prohibition goes beyond the bound of reason in that it attempts to control a man's appetite by legislation and makes a crime out of things that are not crimes. A prohibition law strikes a blow at the very principles upon which our government was founded," end quote. Now, while this was referring to alcohol prohibition, it has many times been brought up by marijuana reformers in regards to prohibition in general. This quote is also false, and I've got the demonstrable proof for you here. This is a clipping from the American issue, 1922, July 22nd, 1922. Authorship of anti-prohibition screed credited to Lincoln is admitted by Georgia wet leader. Now, back in the Prohibition days, there were dries and they were wets. The wets were the people that supported keeping alcohol legal. A statement attributed to great emancipator, widely circulated by liquor advocates in wet and dry campaigns, challenged repeatedly for proof which could not be produced. Former mayor of Atlanta, campaign leader for wets, wrote screed to win the Negro vote in local fight. It saved the day for booze in that battle, and wets have given it worldwide circulation. Efforts to prove Lincoln author failed. Dries have positive evidence of origin of fake. And the article continues. It quotes the Lincoln quote here that makes a crime out of things that are not crimes. Blow at the very principles which government is founded, and so forth. The remainder of the article, in no uncertain terms, completely debunks the Lincoln quote on prohibition. It was anti-prohibition screed credited to Lincoln is admitted by Georgia wet leader. So propaganda existing even back then by anti-prohibition reformers, we should not make the same mistake. We cannot be quoting this Lincoln quote when it is so demonstrably false and the proof is out there. So I encourage all of our reformers listening at Normal Show Live to not let that quote stand. Wherever you see it in the forums, or if you see it in the comments section or someone mentions it to you, make sure you debunk it. It is absolutely untrue. Not that our position is untrue, but we got to remember we have to set the bar higher with respect to credibility. So we cannot be going with quotes that are so easily disproven. Now, as we move on from Lincoln, the issue of marijuana crops back up back in the early 1960s as it became more and more popular amongst the public, which leads us to President John F. Kennedy, elected in 1960. According to a biography of John F. Kennedy written by Michael O'Brien, he describes an affair that JFK had with Mary Pinchot Meyer, the former wife of a CIA agent, Cord Meyer, and sister of Washington Post editor Ben Bradley's wife, Tony. It says, quote, On the evening of July 16, 1962, according to Jim Truitt, Kennedy and Mary Meyer smoked marijuana together. The White House was hosting a conference on narcotics in 2 months, and Kennedy joked about it to Mary. Truitt claimed he himself provided Mary with the pot. The president smoked three of the 6 joints Mary brought to him. At first he felt no effects. Then he closed his eyes and refused a 4th joint. "Suppose the Russians did something now," he said. And there's many other citations of John F. Kennedy using marijuana medically to help treat his back pain. Now, as we move on, we get to Richard Nixon, and we've actually got a clip here from Richard Nixon.
I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
And you could argue that Nixon did earn everything he got. And some of his quotes, of course, Nixon is the one who declared the war on drugs. And some of his quotes show you the racism inherent in the marijuana prohibition that still exists today. And these quotes come from the Nixon tapes and from the Haldeman diaries. Quote, "You have to face the fact that the whole problem is really the blacks. The key is to devise a system that recognizes this all while not appearing to." And his other quote, "I want a goddamn strong statement on marijuana. I mean one that just tears the ass out of them. You know, it's a funny thing. Every one of the bastards that are out for legalizing marijuana is Jewish." And in his quote to the United States Congress, this is where he actually makes the declaration of the drug war. Quote, "America's public enemy number 1 is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new, all-out offensive." End quote. Well, when Nixon's Schaefer Commission came back and recommended decriminalization, he threw it in the trash and continued the drug war we are fighting today. There was some hope in ending the drug war with the election of Jimmy Carter. This next clip from Jimmy Carter is him not as president, but in 1975, campaigning in Georgia for the presidency.
I support a change in law to end federal criminal penalties for possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
That's a man running for president, endorsing decriminalization. And of course, he did get before Congress in 1977 and say, quote, "Penalties against possession of a drug should not be more damaging to an individual than the use of the drug itself. And where they are, they should be changed. Nowhere is this more clear than in the laws against possession of marijuana in private for personal use. Therefore, I support legislation amending federal law to eliminate all federal criminal penalties for the possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana." Now, also during the Carter administration, the Federal Compassionate Investigative New Drug Program was started, federal medical marijuana, for which there are still 4 remaining living patients. Now, we move on to Ronald Reagan, where the drug war takes a turn for the worse. Of course, we all remember Nancy Reagan and the Just Say No campaign.
I know it seems like such a simple message, just say no, but it's an important one.
We also have the quote from Ronald Reagan, who said, quote, "I now have absolute proof that smoking even 1 marijuana cigarette is equal in brain damage to being on Bikini Island during an H-bomb blast." End quote. This is also where we see the rise of the anti-drug groups like DARE and the Partnership for the Drug-Free America. Now, moving on to George Bush the Smarter. George Bush the Smarter, in his inaugural address, said, quote, "There are a few clear areas in which society must rise up united and express our intolerance. The most obvious now is drugs. And there is much to be done and to be said, but take my word for it, this scourge will stop." End quote. Not only that, but George H.W. Bush created the Drug Czar's Office, the ONDCP, and closed that compassionate federal investigative new drug program when all the AIDS patients started applying to get medical marijuana. Although Bush called for a complete stoppage of drug use, the rest of his administration set some more reasonable goals. They were working toward a 10% decrease in casual drug use over the next 2 years and a 50% reduction over the next 10 years. Of course, that did not happen. There are more people using drugs at the end of his term than the beginning. Now, as we move on to the modern era of presidents, starting with Bill Clinton, a very interesting trend emerges. This is a look at the presidential elections since 1992 and the presidential and vice presidential candidate for each party. And as you can see, the people highlighted in green are people who are known to have smoked marijuana. That means 5 of the last 8 people who've run for president and 5 of the last 8 people who've run for vice president have all smoked marijuana. Clinton and Gore and Bush Quayle. Quayle smoked marijuana. Clinton and Gore smoked marijuana. Clinton and Gore in 96 versus Dole Kemp. Kemp smoked marijuana as well. Gore Lieberman in 2000 versus Bush and Cheney. Both Gore and Bush smoked marijuana. Kerry Edwards versus Bush Cheney in 2004. Kerry Edwards and Bush all smoked marijuana. And Obama Biden versus McCain Palin in the most recent election. Obama and Palin have both admitted to smoking marijuana. Now, as we move on here, we get to Bill Clinton, where he said, of course, the most famous presidential clip in marijuana.
When I was in England, I experimented with marijuana a time or two, and I didn't like it, and didn't inhale, and never tried it again.
Of course, Bill Clinton, in the recent book by Christopher Hitchens, was known to have used marijuana brownies while at Oxford, so it may be true that he didn't inhale. Also, during his administration, when California passed medical marijuana, his chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel, exhibited a plan to silence the medical marijuana doctors by taking their license if they even talked about marijuana. It took the Supreme Court to reinstate the free speech rights of doctors that were recommending medical marijuana. We also have George Bush, the not-so-smart.
One major responsibility is to encourage people to use less drugs.
And a biographer of George Bush, whose name was actually Douglas Weed, I'm not making that up, Douglas Weed, wrote that Bush, when asked about the drug questions, said, quote, "I wouldn't answer the marijuana questions. You know why? Because I don't want some little kid doing what I tried," end quote. And that leaves us with President Barack Obama, the most recent president to have admitted to the use of marijuana. In 2004, he had a very telling clip.
Look, when I was a kid, I inhaled frequently. That was the point. Actually,
that was his quote from 2008. He inhaled frequently. That was the point. But back in 2004, he was telling us it was time to decriminalize.
In terms of legalization of drugs, I think that the battle, the war on drugs has been a utter failure, and I think that we need to rethink and decriminalize our marijuana laws.
And when we got together during the Obama's Open for Questions and asked him to please rethink and decriminalize our marijuana laws, he said it wouldn't be a good idea.
I have to say that there was one question that was voted on that ranked fairly high, and that was whether legalizing marijuana would improve the economy and job creation. And I don't know what this says about the online audience, but I just want, I don't want people to think that this was a fairly popular question. We want to make sure that it was answered. The answer is no, I don't think that is a good strategy to grow our economy. So, all right.
So President Obama laughed at us in 2009. Most recently, in 2011, Mackenzie Allen, a member of LEAP, asked the president a question again on legalization, and he had this to say.
Well, there's a difference between sending this to jail for a few ounces and legalizing.
Well, I think this is an entirely legitimate topic for debate. I am not in favor of legalization.
Yeah, sorry, that was Joe Biden in there as well. So there are your presidents, all the way from George Washington to Barack Obama, and their stance and use of marijuana and prohibition. Thanks for joining us here at Normal Show Live. For Cannabis Carrie and Ganja John, I'm Radical Russ. We'll see you on the replays. For those of you staying tuned for Hour 2, we'll talk to you some more about John's weekend. And until next time, take care of each other, tokers.